was 21 years old, a female broadcast journalism major taking summer classes in TV reporting. Out on an assignment for class, I was shooting B-roll at the ballpark for a story on ASU baseball and the College World Series. It was around 3 p.m. I pulled into the parking lot, which was entirely deserted, and parked my car right next to the curb, as close to the park as I could get. June in Arizona is brutal, heat-wise, so I had every intention of making this process a short one. I left the trunk open and my keys in the ignition with the car on to keep the AC running. The gates to the ballpark were padlocked and chained shut, so I set up my camera on tripod right outside the box office to get setup footage. I'd been there for about 10 minutes when a silver pickup pulled into the lot and parked perpendicularly in front of my car, making it impossible for me to leave if I had gotten in my car to drive away. At this point, I knew something was going on, because literally the entire lot was empty, and this guy parked about 2 feet away from my car. My assumptions were confirmed in the next few minutes. The guy got out of his beat-up double-cab pickup, leaving his car on with both the front and back doors on the driver's side wide open. He started walking toward me, seeming slightly aggressive. Physically, the guy was about 6'3" and heavy-set with white hair and glasses, probably in his 50s. He wore a dull yellow baseball cap, a filthy blue shirt, and blue sweatpants. Looked like he hadn't showered or changed clothes in weeks. His face was genuinely disturbing. To this day, I can't accurately describe the feeling I got from the expression on his face. A twisted, simmy grin, but his eyes looked menacing, like he had a screw loose. He walked with intent, with one hand in his pocket as he headed for where I stood. I could feel his eyes burning into me. No exaggeration, I was frozen. As he approached me, he asked in a hushed tone, "Is ASU playing today?" He said it slowly, never taking his eyes off me, still moving closer. I'll never forget how that stare felt. I was so scared at that exact moment. I knew he was trying to talk to me in some attempt to distract my attention from what I already knew. I didn't respond, so he asked again. I replied with a quick no, picked up my phone, and answered like I was receiving a call. He just stood there, still staring. I spoke loudly to ensure the man heard what I was saying. "Hey, are you almost here?" "Oh, okay. Yeah, I see you." And I waved toward the street behind the man. As I said this, the guy slowly ambled away from me, heading toward the ballpark gates. The entire time, he did not once take his eyes off me. Not once. He was glaring. It felt like he was angry with me. He looked furious. I took notice that it was still just he and I in that lot, and his car was parked directly in front of mine so that I would have to reverse in order to drive away. Once he was a reasonable distance away, about 25 feet, eyes still locked on me, I picked up my equipment and ran to my car. He followed. I was frantically attempting to repack my car, throwing my equipment into the trunk without even bothering to shut it. I was literally running back to the driver's side door when he met me there. The guy's car was still on, and his doors were still open. He reached out to grab me. At that exact second, I ducked into the driver's seat, and without closing the door, threw my car into reverse, slamming on the accelerator. I was bawling at this point. I flew out of the parking lot and drove away. I knew I had to call the police, but I wanted to get the guy's license plate number so they could actually do something about what had just happened. I don't know what possessed me to do so, but I went back to the ballpark. As I pulled into the lot, the truck came barreling toward my car. He then followed me. I drove directly to the campus police station in Tempe. He drove past it. I didn't get his license plate number, but I did fill out a police report. Nothing ever came of it as far as I know. Phoenix is the abduction capital of America, and this guy's physical appearance screamed insanity. I will never again feel safe just because it's daytime. I will never again go to a deserted area by myself. Parking lots will creep me out for the rest of my life. And I'm thinking, those are all good things. The following account occurred roughly 3 years ago during the summer of 2012. It's always been difficult for me to talk about, but I found writing about it to be therapeutic. I was 17 at the time, and I had just gotten my first job. I lived in rural Western Virginia in a small mountain community. My mom's friend owned a camping resort not far from my house that had a general store, and she said she'd pay me to help out in the store during the busy months in the summer. It was a pretty easy job, and I met a lot of out-of-towners, which was nice because our community could get so isolated. Most of us lived pretty far away from each other. One day, a big burly mountain man type came into the store. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, probably 6'5" and about 280 pounds. He looked dirty, like he worked outside a lot. His clothes were sort of tattered, and he had a long beard. We had a few of the woodsy hermit types in the area, and he definitely looked like one of them. He bought some basic items, one of which was one of our homemade bars of soap. When he came to the register, he looked me up and down carefully. He didn't talk for a minute, just stared. His people skills clearly needed work. "Did you make this soap?" he asked gruffly. "Possibly," I said. "I help out with that sometimes." "You make a lot of your own stuff?" "Toiletries and things like that, yeah." "Not like that," he said, nodding to himself. I honestly did not know how to respond. I quickly rang up his items and he paid with crumpled money. Right before he left, he asked, "You cook too?" "Sometimes," I replied. "I bet the boys around here are itching to marry you," he said as he smiled to himself. I said nothing. I was puzzled as to what I said that stood out as wife material. I told Krista, my mom's friend and my boss, about the bizarre encounter and she laughed it off. So did my family and friends. But then, mountain men started turning up more often. We chatted a little bit here and there, and I found he had a cabin in the woods he claimed he built with his bare hands. He said he hunted and lived off the land, other than the things he bought at the store. Over time, our chatter escalated, with him making comments about how nice it would be to have a woman like me around who could make those things and cook his kills. One time, he even said that I had the birthin' hips that men lust after. He even started inviting me to fish with him, hunt with him, see his place, etc., and I always politely declined. But he got more and more insistent, and I told Krista about how uncomfortable he was starting to make me. The intensity with which he said those things really scared me. She said that when he came in, go get her and she would ring him up. Thanks to her, I started speaking to him less, and I thought I wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. But one night, I was closing up. It was late, around 10 at night. Krista had left about an hour before, and I was leaving by myself. The only two cars in front of the store were an old blue pickup and mine. I was immediately alarmed, because I knew Mountain Man drove a blue pickup. But I didn't see him in the lot, just his car. So I walked quickly to my car and checked the back seat before I started her up. But then when I first turned the key into the ignition, I got nothing but sputters. I tried several more times and got scared quickly. Of all the nights, why is this happening tonight? I remember asking myself angrily. Just as I was reaching for my phone to call for help, there was a loud pounding on the driver's side window. I'm shocked I didn't piss myself. I didn't even want to look because I knew it was him. But I did, and my suspicions were confirmed. He smiled a big grin at me, showing me exactly which teeth were missing. Need some help? He said loudly through the window. I shook my head furiously. My dad is on his way, I said, hoping to scare him off. I hadn't spoken to my dad in years. Mountain Man laughed. No, he's not, he said. Open the door. The hairs on my neck stood up straight. How did he know I was bluffing? No, I said firmly. Leave me alone. Suddenly, he looked angry. He pulled the handle, but I had locked all the doors when I first got in. He kept furiously pulling the handle and started pounding on the window. Leave now, or I'm calling the cops, I screamed at him. He clearly wasn't getting the message, so I pulled out my phone and called 911. I must have sounded hysterical to the dispatcher, and I knew she could hear him pounding. She said she would have officers out ASAP, but out here, that could be a while. The cops are on their way. Leave, now, I screamed at Mountain Man, who didn't seem to let it deter him. But after a few more minutes of pounding, he suddenly stopped and walked back to his truck. I watched him go, hopeful he would leave me alone. But then, he started walking back toward me, with a fucking crowbar in hand. No! I screamed at him. Get the fuck away from me! He started swinging at the driver's side window with the crowbar. I ducked down into the passenger seat on the floor and covered the back of my neck like they teach you in tornado drills. I heard the sickening crack of the window, but not for long. Suddenly, I heard male voices shouting, telling Mountain Man to get away from the car. I sat up and saw two men approaching, one with a shotgun pointed at Mountain Man. I recognized them as a couple of guests staying at the resort for a camping trip. I breathed a sigh of relief and got out of the car, telling them that the police were on the way. I thanked them profusely as we waited for the police, and surprisingly, Mountain Man didn't make any moves to get away. The cops came pretty quickly after that, so he didn't have much of a chance. They took him away, and I gave them my statement. I was pretty shaken up for a while afterwards. A few weeks later, I finally got the scoop on the man. Apparently, he had a history of mental illness. He'd been in and out of state institutions. He really had been living in an old cabin in the woods, where he wasn't taking his meds, and his issues were only getting worse. My cousin Luke is a cop, and later on he told me some more about the case that he had heard through some of the other officers. The police did a search of the cabin after the incident to see if there was anything that might be of interest to them. They found a journal that Mountain Man kept. Apparently, in it he said he was lonely and wanted a wife. He mentioned me by name a lot. Stupid name tag. And Luke said that there were a lot of lewd things in there about me that he didn't want to share, but tried to put it simply by saying that Mountain Man had a detailed plan to abduct me, starting with sabotaging my car engine to get me into a vulnerable position. When Luke said that, I nearly burst into tears thinking about how horribly that night could have gone if those two men hadn't come along. Thankfully, he's been put back into a state institution. With any luck, he'll stay there for good. This happened to me several years back. I was living with a friend at the time and was en route back to my apartment from a night with my family. I was kind of in a foul mood and was out of cigarettes, so I stopped at a gas station on my way back home. This gas station was dingy. I mean, just absolutely run down. The sad thing is that it was built that way. It was built to be barely functional. The lights outside didn't always work, and the place always smelled of burnt rubber. It was kind of sketchy during the day, but at 10 at night, it took on a whole different air. However, I was seriously in need of cigarettes, so I stopped. I got out of my car, went inside, grabbed a bottle of Gatorade, and made my way to the counter, only to notice that there was no one standing there. I'd stopped by this gas station before and had the same thing happen, figuring they were either in the bathroom or at their house. The employees were all part of a family who lived on the premises, so I hung around for a few minutes. Soon enough, the door to the restroom flew open, and out lumbered a rather angry-looking female. She rang me up for the Gatorade, gave me attitude when I said I wanted cigarettes, which I totally didn't understand. Like, you never get business. Sell when someone wants something. And I was on my way. Total time that had elapsed from when I got out of my car to walking out of the door was maybe 5 minutes. I walk over to my car and notice the one overhanging light that had been on when I got out of my car was now off. Not thinking much of it, I went to open my door and noticed that the car was unlocked. I almost never leave it unlocked. But then again, I figured I was in kind of a hurry, so it was possible. I got in, started my car, lit a cigarette, and kind of blindly backed out while opening my Gatorade. I recapped the bottle, put it in the seat next to me, and was about to pull out onto the road when a hand reached out from my back seat. Panicked, my immediate thought was to turn around, but as I started to, the man said, "Don't fucking turn around if you know what's good for you." I sat facing forward and asked him what he wanted. He said he wanted to ride somewhere. My phone was in my book sack on the floor of my passenger seat, too far to grab discreetly. I asked him where he wanted to go, and he gave me directions to a well-known crack alley about 4 miles out from where we were. I'd been to the area before. We used to deliver pizza in that part of town before switching to a relatively safer delivery area, so finding it was no trouble. As I drove, I kept trying to sneak glances at him in my rearview mirror, but it seemed like every time I did, his face was encompassed by shadows. We got to the place he wanted to go, and he rolled the window down, yelling out some guy's name. That guy came over to my car and sold this intruder some drugs through my back window, the whole time talking about that scared honky in the front seat. After about 15 minutes, they were done. Once the dealer walked away, the man in the back seat told me to bring him back to the gas station where he'd gotten into my car. Now, the stretch of road to get back there was not well lit or well traveled after dark, but I went anyway. I just wanted him to get out of my car. As we drove back, he started trying to talk me up, which I thought was weird. I gave reasonable answers without revealing anything personal about myself. We were about halfway through our trip when he asked me to pull over to the side of the road. This stretch of road went over one of those man-made concrete ditches, which meant there was a significant paved shoulder over the ditch. He had me pull over there and turn off the car. "Do you believe in God?" My heart started racing. "I'm not sure. If you died tonight, do you think you'd see God?" I don't know. I'd like to think so. Close your eyes. Put your hands on the steering wheel. Push your head forward and let it rest on the steering wheel. Trembling, I did as he commanded. "Now count." "What? Are you fucking deaf?" I said count. So, I did. I started counting. Slowly counting. My pace matched the seconds ticking by. I wondered how many more I'd have. I could tell he was shifting in the back seat. I figured this was it. Then he simply got out of the car and ran off. I kept counting. I counted to at least 1,000 before I felt like it might be okay to look up. I didn't want to look up to him standing in front of my car waiting for me to disobey. When I did look up, though, he wasn't there. I sped off toward my apartment, grabbed my phone, and called the cops. Naturally, they said there was nothing they could do. I didn't have a description of the guy, other than he was a male. I thought he might be black, because I think that was the color of the skin I saw when I initially started to turn around, but it was so fleeting that I couldn't be certain. He didn't take anything out of my car, or leave anything. I learned a few things that day. 1, I never ever leave my car unlocked. 2, I always check my car before I get into it. 3, I'm never stopping at that gas station again. I no longer live there, so that helps. And 4, if someone still somehow manages to get into my car to try something like that again, I am running at full speed into the nearest light post. I'll be wearing a seatbelt, while there's virtually no chance they will be.